Welcome, new viewers and old viewers, to another episode of The Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. This is the show where you learn all about conflict and negotiation, the what, the how, the why, the when, the who. Frameworks are introduced that are research-based, that are pertinent to the topic at hand. I also like to share stories. I believe that most of us learn from hearing stories of actual factual or non-factual events. It helps hit home points that are being illustrated. I like to reserve the last Friday of each month to have a guest who is either an expert in conflict resolution or someone I deem would add value to the topic at hand. So with not much ado, welcome to a new month. We're in the month of February. I'm based in Canada, Alberta, Canada. And I've decided to have a theme for each month. This month's theme is interpersonal relationships. If you have not watched the previous episodes, I highly recommend you do so. Why? Because we were journeying through my 5 A's of conflict resolution mnemonic. So we started off by laying the foundation of what conflict is in terms of constructive or destructive, and then we journeyed through the 5 A's of conflict resolution, which is my original mnemonic. So feel free to go back and view those episodes. However, not viewing them will not affect your ability to join us for this episode. So in keeping with the theme interpersonal relationships, we are also going to be introducing a framework called Attribution Theory, which is one of many perception theories out there. And attribution theory is popularly used in organizations. So when you want to evaluate or analyze or understand human behavior, you see that being used in organizations. So what is perception? So there are different definitions out there. We know we have 6 senses. So you could say perception, the way I would like to use it, just for the sake of this episode and subsequent episodes, is think of it as a sensory input of some sort. Then you have to make meaning of it. You have to interpret what that sensory input is. So in keeping with interpersonal relationships, you might see someone say something, or it might be a nonverbal, and then you have to interpret what was meant by it. So with attribution theory, what it talks about is basically think of it in 3 folds. And by the way, it was actually introduced by an individual called Heder. I hope I'm pronouncing the individual's name properly. And then it was advanced into framework by Wiener and colleagues. So it was introduced by Heder in the 1950s, I believe. So yeah, so attribution theory. So the premise of it is this: you must observe a behavior. You must believe the behavior was intentional. And 3, you have to judge whether the behavior was internally or externally caused. So by internally, was it a personality issue? Or externally could be, was there some environmental factors or organizational factors that impacted or affected the behavior? So that's pretty much attribution theory in a nutshell. So what is today's episode titled? It is Communication, the Nonverbals. So as you can imagine, when you talk about conflict resolution in the workplace, communication is an actual subset, and you can talk about communication till pigs fly or the cows come home. But because we only have the first half hour for content, I have to narrow the aspects of communication that I'd like us to talk about today. So specifically, there'll be 3 aspects that I'd like us to discuss, and those would be body language, written, and last but not least, silence. If you want anything more elaborate or in-depth, feel free to join me for any one of the conflict resolutions workshops that I offer, Or if you want an intense program, I am a conflict resolution coach for the hybrid program with the Canadian International Institute for Applied Negotiation. So you can partner with me in that respect, and then we can journey really deep. So coming back to this episode, and we're talking about the nonverbals. So I would like us to do something. I believe when we're talking about nonverbals, visual or two would be appropriate. Wouldn't you agree? I believe so. So I would like to share my screen with you. I want to share a specific slide. And while we're doing that, a thought actually occurred to me that when we talk about the nonverbals, have you ever thought of the fact that nonverbals can be a result of cultural backgrounds, how you were brought up? Just reflect on that. So I would like to share this screen that has different faces on it. And there are about 4 faces that I would like us to focus on specifically. So as I try and get my pointer here, feel free to have a quick look at it. But what I would like you to focus are this lady here, this second lady here, this gentleman, and way over the top right here, this lady here as well. So let's start with this lady over here on the far left. So when you look at her, and again, we're talking about the nonverbals, body language to start off with in communication. So when we talk about nonverbals, as the name implies, it has to do with anything that's related to the non-verbalizing aspect of communication. So this lady on the left, right here, if I were to look at her, most people I think would agree and say she looks like she is smiling and calm and welcoming. And then when you come down to this lady right here, people's perceptions might be different, okay? So when we talk about attribution theory, which I mentioned is a type of perception theory, we must remember that people's perceptions are that. You can actually have actual perceptions or false perceptions. Accurate perceptions are very important because let me take a moment before we continue with this lady. You can imagine how important perceptions are in the workplace because an accurate perception of your abilities or your ability to interact with people plays a huge role in terms of promotion, your appraisals, even to get hired, even in an interview setting. People might just evaluate you based on their perceptions and hire you based on what they see for first impressions. So as much as we know and believe that first impressions are important, first impressions are not always accurate. There are myriad of factors that might affect how someone relates to you at the first meeting. So in the same token as the majority might carry the vote, the majority is not always right. However, does that mean that we should not pay attention to perceptions or try and fix it? Absolutely not. We should pay attention, but we should give room and be gracious to know that what we perceive may not be right, accurate. So we need to investigate, fact find, especially when you're evaluating somebody for something like a promotion, okay, or an appraisal, something that is of substance. You don't want to be a victim of false perceptions, either by yourself perceiving the person or what you've heard of other people, right? So when you talk about perception theory, you've also heard of self-perception. So with the nonverbals here, the way you self-perceive yourself could be very different from how other people are perceiving you. So now, coming back to this lady here, right here, if I were to ask you, what goes through your mind when you see her? Some people might be like, my goodness, she looks a little bit scary. She looks like she has the resting blank, blank, blank face. Now, I'm not going to say what the word blank, blank is, but I will help you. Do you remember charades? Well, the expression is 3 words. First word is rested. third word is face. And the second word I will help you is a synonym for a female dog. You got it? So my question right now is, why do such derogatory terms usually apply to females? That's food for thought. That's probably another research project on its own. But why indeed? I don't think we should be encouraging such terms. How about we use an expression like a resting serious face or a resting pensive face, right? So for her, again, those were the perceptions some people might have, but the reality could be a whole different story. The reality could be she just came from a meeting whereby that it was serious, and she's thinking about what happened in the meeting, and then she meets you, and this was the expression you saw of her. Now, I paused there to say something. I myself, personally, my self-perception and what I've heard, when I'm in a pensive mood, so let's say I'm working on a project or I'm thinking seriously about anything, I can have a resting serious face. But is that who I am? No, it's not. It's just an expression that I have. So does that mean I just let it be? No, I try to have a smile. But again, you want to have a genuine smile, not a fake smile. You can tell when someone has a fake smile or a real smile. It could be, what's the difference? Well, I'm not an expert in that, but one thing I have noticed, and I know for a fact, is that when you have a genuine smile, it actually reaches to your eyes. You can see someone smiling with your eyes, which I think is so crucial in our world right now, especially when some people are wearing masks. You can't see their faces, their mouths, that they're smiling. So that's why I chuckle, and it's wholesome and warming when I see some people who have these masks that has a smiley face in the mouth. You can't help but you're riveted to the mouth area, and it automatically makes the viewer smile. So I thought that was so ingenious when I saw someone with that, or a few people with that. And I wondered, when you think about in the healthcare arena, for especially patients or clients or residents who are isolated and didn't have family members visiting them, wouldn't it have been lovely if we'd had staff? And forgive me if I'm presumptuous, maybe some staff did do this, but wouldn't it be a nice, innovative idea to have the staff have a smiling face on their mask? And of course, it has to be a medically approved mask, depending on your work setting, right? But wouldn't that just create extra joy for the clients, patients, residents, and also for the person wearing it? I think it would. I think it would increase their endorphins. So yeah, so this lady here, so basically I just want to illustrate the point that the perceptions you might have of this person may not be accurate. Now, it's another thing if it's an ongoing pattern that this person always has this kind of resting pensive face. And yeah, if you feel comfortable, and again, depending on your relationship with the individual, or if you're a supervisor or a friend, you might mention to the person, by the way, I don't know if you noticed that this is the expression that I mostly see you in. Is everything okay? And the person might be like, oh, I never knew that. Thank you for telling me. You can go the other way. Leave me alone. So just pick your conversations appropriately, okay? And then over to the right here, we have this gentleman. He's smiling broadly. He has his arms crossed. Now, if you've taken any communication class, or you don't have to take a communication class to know this, but you might have heard it in the workplace, movies, you name it. Do not cross your arms. It shows like a closed body language. Now, as much as I agree with that, I think that it's important that we just don't isolate one action without looking at the whole comprehensively. And by that, again, yes, his arms are crossed, but he is smiling, and not just smiling. He's showing teeth, he's smiling broadly. So how about if by crossing his arms, that's actually an action whereby he's comfortable? Or what if his office is cold, like he's feeling a little bit cold? So again, do you see how perceptions can be so far from the truth? Did you know there are some people, when they're uneasy and uncomfortable, they cross their arms? It's almost similar to when I think back to childhood, that little child who has that security blanket that they carry around with them everywhere. So for them, they don't have their blanket or whatever form the metaphorical blanket might be, but for them it's crossing their arms and makes them comfortable, okay? On the other hand, though, some people who do cross their arms like that do it intentionally to be dominating and overpowering of the person that they're meeting with, okay? Now, let's go down to the bottom here. This gentleman is also has his arms crossed, but the difference between the two pictures is this. He does not have a smile on his face. Now, as I looked at this picture carefully, another thought came to mind, which is very pertinent and valid and has been studied. Look at the environment of his room. What is the difference between this picture and the picture above? One is light, there's lots of bright light, the other one is dark. So imagine if you were coming to a room to meet with somebody, I come into contact with a gentleman or female, whoever, with your arms crossed, and the expression with on this man's face, and it's dark. I think of the movie scene of when someone is about to be maybe injured or murdered. Dun, dun, and like, you know, that ominous music that plays, right? Well, that's what the setting and the ambient of this room portrays, even though you can see a light standing there, a lampstand, but still it's dark overall. So this made me think of how actually, in keeping with nonverbal communication, also consider your environment. So if you're gonna have a serious conversation with a colleague or an employee or someone that reports to you, regardless, be mindful of the setting, okay? So a dark environment is not conducive for fruitful and constructive conversation. And that's why actually when people are negotiating, let's say, whatever, a project, funding, resources, you need to choose your environment carefully. So it's best to choose a neutral environment whereby someone can say, oh, they're in my territory, so that one person feels more comfortable at the expense of the other. No, choose an environment, a physical environment that's neutral to both parties, or at least that is acceptable to both parties, okay? So that enhances the comfort level and hopefully might create a conducive setting for the conversation at hand, okay? So even though that has nothing to do with body language, that's something to keep in mind as well, okay? And then on the top right here, we have this lady who is smiling. What's the difference? Her eyes are shut, but you can see she's smiling. And then when you look closer in the background, what do you see? You see, well, I see a rocket. I see the solar system, stars, and then over here, I see high-rising buildings over yonder. So I like to say it's only the artist that created this picture knows exactly what they wanted to portray. Each and every one of us viewing it might have our perceptions. So I specifically use the word, I see this, right? Someone else might see the same thing. I'll be like, no, that's not what I see. Even though it appears obvious, they might see a totally different thing. It reminds me of a movie. I think it was called, was it The Problem Child? I think it was A Problem Child. And there was a scene, and I think it was in a psychologist's room or psychiatric room. And the therapist was asking somebody, what do you see? And the individual responded, I see pink bunnies. And the therapist got angry. It's like, how do you see pink bunnies? It's a black and white picture. So I'm not making light on if the person had a mental issue going on there, but I just used that scenario for a little bit of humor, with all respect to anyone who might have a condition that might skew their perception of things. For example, body dysmorphia, where they see themselves, but they see a totally different thing. No, I'm not doing that. I'm just creating using it to illustrate my point of what someone might draw might be perceived differently by different people. An example would be abstract, right? So again, do not make assumptions. That's the point. What you perceive, give room that you might be mistaken. And then I decided, of course, to add this little pictures here of the feline and of the dog here. Why? Just for humor, but they also have expressions as well. And yeah, in terms of nonverbals, people might describe you in certain animal characteristics that might be positive or not positive. As an example, let's use the feline. I am a dog lover. I'm not a cat lover. But I remember in a workplace I used to work with, someone said to me, "You're very feline." And to me, not being a cat lover, I was like, that's the worst compliment you could ever give me. But the individual was coming from the fact that I guess my emotions and my movements. Maybe she was thinking more like a cheetah because I am tall, slender. Maybe that's where she was coming with that. But again, without talking to her, I would have perceived it totally different, right? So yeah, so I think that's enough for body language as it pertains to facial expressions in particular and some actions in crossing your arms. So I will stop sharing my screen, sorry. And then let's talk a little bit more. The next one we're going to talk a bit more about is the written part of things, the written communication. So when you talk about written communication, I would like us to zoom in on three parts, three aspects. When you think about typing, right? So when you think about written communication in the workplace, it could take the form of typing, email messages, it could be memos that are posted, it could be you making a handwritten note, and it could be texting, yes, and as well, texting. So in terms of the typing part of things and emails, in the workplaces I've worked in, my professional life, for the most part, has been, when I say for the most part, I'll say 17 of the 18 years has been in Alberta. The first year when I graduated was in New Brunswick. But my point is this. In the work settings in Alberta, I can't speak for all workplaces, and I don't want to be presumptuous and overgeneralize, but in Alberta, the workplaces I've worked in healthcare in particular, the courtesy is respond within 2 business days to any query, okay? Now, this might be understood and assumed, but some workplaces actually have this written in policy. So why am I talking about this? So I mentioned this because sometimes when you don't get a response, some people might take that as an, oh, did they forget? Did they not forget? Are they avoiding me? Did I say something wrong? You just get all this thoughts going through your mind. Take a deep breath, be patient and wait. Again, depending on the matter, if it's urgent, in your email line, write urgent or put an exclamation mark or whatever it is to get the attention of the individual to receive it, okay? And also I wanted to take this opportunity to stress the importance of, it is important that your grammar is appropriate, your formatting, syntax, commas are placed where they should be, exclamations are appropriate, because you can inadvertently put them in the wrong spot and convey a total different meaning that you intended. So this brings me to the texting part of things. Yes, most healthcare organizations shy against texting. Sometimes it's not legal depending on what you're using it for. And again, thinking about in a patient care environment, you don't want to compromise or jeopardize safety by sending a prescription via text. Usually we never do that. But again, with this world and COVID being disruptive, both positively and negatively, some organizations may, I do not know. I haven't worked in the front lines for a while, so I cannot speak to that fact. But with emojis, be careful with that. So when I ask you, for example, if I go like this, what comes to mind? Some might say prayer. Some people might say thank you. Again, depending on the person receiving it, they might have a different interpretation of what your emojis mean. Did you know that it's an actual manual for emojis? And sometimes they're cultural sensitive and cultural specific. Yeah, different countries might have different meanings for their emojis on the phone. So be mindful of that. And always reread what you sent via email, handwritten, or emoji. There have been times I've inadvertently typed in the wrong emoji that created total, it's almost like a discrepancy in what I said and then in the emoji. So always proofread what you're sending, okay, in terms of the written. And just a little hint that you may not know. Did you know that is actual, this is in conjunction with written and how that can create conflict. So let me give an example. I was about to say there's a national day called National Doodle Day. So you're like, what's Doodle? Doodle has to do with, let's say, for example, you're in a workplace meeting, you're there talking, let's say you're the leader or you're a guest speaker, and you see people taking notes, or at least so you thought. But when you come closer, this person is doodling. So the difference between doodling and drawing is that drawing is intentional. Doodling is not intentional. You just put your hand to the paper and whatever comes forth. But did you know that doodling is not a sign of disrespect? It's actually an act that enhances concentration and enhances creativity. So keep that in mind if you see someone who is either watching TV, well, you should be watching TV at work, but whatever setting you find yourself, you see this individual doodling, there is a purpose behind that, okay? And then last but not least, let's talk about silence. That was the third part of the nonverbals we're going to address today. So silence in itself could be positive or negative. So from a positive aspect of things, again, usually it could be, let's talk about you're in a meeting with someone, you're asking their view about something, it's high tension, and you're not getting a response. Instead, you have the smile on this person's face. It's not a smirk, but they just don't talk and smile. I have found that some people use this. I have used it, and the time I have used that is usually when I'm trying. So this persons are certain, especially your opinion. I'm expressing my opinion, and we're having a hard time seeing eye to eye. Sometimes I get a check in my spirit. So that could be considered the sixth sense, if you will, intuition, and yeah, just be silent. And I'll tell you, 98 to 99% of the time when I adapt that strategy, the person usually comes back and says, oh, you were right. So it's not always a strategy that I remember to use, but when I do, it usually bears productive fruit for me in terms of relationships with individuals when it comes to conflict, things like that. Now, on the negative side, sometimes people use silence to dominate people. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about psychological warfare in another episode. But sometimes in a conflict situation or negotiation, you're waiting for a response. People won't be silent. Be like, oh, I'm just going to let them stew about it. I have the power. I got the power. In a negative way. In a positive way, silence is good because it helps you think, information gather, and problem solve. Okay, so think about that when someone uses silence, excuse me, in a conflict situation. So I just wanted to share that with you. I hope you find that very informative and perhaps a paradigm shift on the different aspects and topics that we discussed so far. If you want to reach me, one thing I would like you to know again is that I am an organization development consultant. I'm going to share my screen to show you how you can reach me and my services there. So one of the services that I offer, like I mentioned, is organizational development. So if you need assistance in any one of this, sorry about that. If you need assistance, it's okay. It seems like my share is a little bit temperamental, but you can reach me at shalomeagleswings.care or Cheryl@shalomeagleswings if you need any help with conflict resolution, coaching, or organizational development in terms of strategic management, quality improvement, risk management, you name it. But before you leave, I always like to leave you with something. Remember that you, that's right, you are here to be a solution. Be the best you that you can be, and do not rob the world of a precious gem, you. That's right, you are precious, needed for such a time as this to be a solution in your workplace for a problem that is causing challenges. So same place next time. Come join us with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA, for another episode of the Dancing Negotiator. Goodbye.